Welcome to Lancefield on the Line. My name is David Lancefield. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome James Bryce, the CEO and founder of Speech Intelligence, a resource that teaches as you speak, powered by machine learning and data science. A tool and a service I've been using myself most recently. We'll judge whether that's had an impact or not. James has worked in this field of speech communication for well over 20 years, even with his youthful looks. And he's pioneered the shift we're making from in-person coaching to more data-driven approaches using autonomous learning, using artificial intelligence. Your speech intelligence has been lauded and awarded some great things from CogX, the Innovation in AI Award for 2 years running. That's a fantastic award. And indeed the coveted EdTech Evidence Aware Award from the Institute of Education at UCL. Many congratulations. That's fantastic. You have a fascinating and impressive background, which is slightly intimidating. You are a former Royal Marines officer. I stand up tall as I say that. And you have a BA double honours in Chinese from the University of Durham and the People's University in China. Wow. James, you are most welcome.
David, I'm absolutely delighted to be here.
Very good. I'm feeling a bit self-conscious, self-aware, intimidated, partly because of the topic, not just because you're an ex-Marine. But I remember when I interviewed Melissa Lund, who was a designer and looked at sort of our body image and how we come across. I felt as though she was looking through me the whole time in the interview. So you have an algorithm in your head, but let's see how I get on in terms of how I speak. But anyway, let's just dive into speech intelligence. Let's understand what it is. And indeed, I'm curious as to what made you come up with the idea and the tool in the first place. So let's start there.
In the first instance, David, I've had to understand, examine, and then develop this right from the inside of my mind and from nothing. What I mean by that is going back myself several decades, teenager. I'm an individual who knows how to think, who has lots of thoughts. But actually, when it comes to expressing them into words and into phrases, to externalizing all that, huge challenges. I went through a period in my early 20s when actually I would try to speak in front of my friends and the words would come out in the wrong order. And in terms of a personal feedback loop, it's not a great place to be in because there's very little reward going on. There's a lot of confusion. For me, it's been a very long journey in the sense to understand the relationship between between cognitive functions in the mind, between the ability to have thoughts, and then the last bit, which is actually expressing them in front of others and understanding how that makes you feel, and then what happens after that. So it's, for me, speech intelligence, and we've really only recently named this as a category, as a declaration of of our intent really in the phenomenon. It's been a very long journey.
So where are you at now then? So you have is it the right term, a tool, a service, which I begin to use? Just tell us about exactly how it works, and then I want to dive into a few other topics.
I freeze when I'm asked where we're at, actually, because what then immediately lines up in my mind is, what are we as a company? What is the product? What is the technology? What is the category? And I have to pick and choose. So what I'll start with is what we're at now is that we are a capability. It's driven by technology. So you have a mobile app, let's say, yes. And within that mobile app is the software which can actually listen to you as you speak. And at a second level, it can look at you as you communicate, and it can give you immediate feedback as to things like, are you talking too quickly? Are you trying to explain things in too complex a manner? Are you making too much or too little eye contact? How are all the behaviors combining so that yourself is properly coming across as a coordinated activity that other people are going to respond to it? It's like a speech coach in your pocket.
Oh, I like that. That's a great phrase. So I'm curious about the level of consciousness that people have about their own speech intelligence. The reason I'm curious is because there's a lot of practice and talk about presentational impact.
Yeah.
Getting on a stage, in person or virtual, how you come across. But a lot of that is around, I would say, presence and obviously content as well. But I wonder if it's less about the quality of speech in the way you describe. So I'm curious about how much consciousness of the people you interact with and more generally, where are we at in terms of its maturity?
Low consciousness. I would equate where, as a professional community, let's just start there at the moment.
Yes.
Where are we at in terms of our fluency of understanding of the dynamics, the role and the possibilities of speech and communication? I would say that if we're holding a pen and we're learning to write, is we understand the relationship between pen, ink and paper. If we're in cursive, we can take the pen across, but we don't know when to stop and start, and we're not really that good at forming letters.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
The approach the industry has taken for a long time, really since Dale Carnegie stood up on that stage in New York and started professing about sales capability, primarily through the lens of charisma, we have not really got very far in terms of understanding the principles to speech and communication. If it's the equivalent of written communication, we're very fluent at school with how that rolls, and we get drilled extensively in terms of fluency, articulation. We don't do the same with speech and communication. We don't teach it.
I wondered that. You've spoken about that. I think you were on the BBC talking about that, if I'm not correct, and other topics. But what happens then? Because it's such a critical communication tool, how you speak, what you say. What's going wrong?
I don't think anything's gone wrong. I think it's to what extent do people as a community, do scientists, do practitioners? I'm a practitioner, I'm not a scientist. Do we want to actually get to the bottom of it and understand how it rolls? It is complex. Now, that doesn't mean it's complicated. Two very different concepts. But if you're going to have tenacity, grit, determination, if you're going to think systemically as well, you've got to bring a lot into the center and understand how it all connects. What is it as a system? Example, why do pauses actually lead to voice pitch modulation, which is not a connection that people will immediately make?
That's true.
Yeah. And what is the cause and effect between those two features? It's complex and it's fascinating, but it's rich as a system. When you look at the industrial approach, which is pretty much capped at, we'll call it presentation skills.
Yes.
Because a lot of people do presentations, or, oh, you got a public speech coming up. Great. Well, we've got a course for public speaking.
Yes.
Then none of those event-driven or high context approaches actually burrow down into the fundamental set of behaviors, human cognitive behaviors, which are driving any event at the end of the day. So it's easy to put on, it's easier to put on a presentation skills course and charge X thousand pounds or dollars a day and get a short-term, short-lived result for an individual. It is much harder, and it is a much longer-term endeavor to actually fundamentally shift the behaviors of a human in terms of how we speak and communicate. And I guess speech intelligence declares the values of, look, speech agility is needed by listeners.
It's quite radical, isn't it? I mean, this is, sorry to interrupt, this is quite radical in terms of you're calling out a massive gap in our skill set, in many of us, most of us, right? The majority of our skill set, which is not being addressed in education systems, including the systems in companies in terms of development. So I wonder, I'm going to move around a bit, if I may, because I'm now, my mind is pacing and moving at speed, which is one of my challenges, which I'll come back to in terms of how I speak well or not. Is we sort of know when somebody speaks in a way that doesn't engage us, too many ums, ers, monotone. So the negative is probably pretty obvious. I imagine, you know, listeners now are either thinking, yes, that's you, David, or definitely not you, James, or some politician or personality.
Yeah.
But my question is, how much do we recognize great practice when somebody speaks, either in conversation or elsewhere, the positive? Do we value it at this stage, or are we not skilled enough in our hearing, if you like?
I think we're very skilled because actually we try to be as efficient as possible when we're coming to decision making about other people. But I think at the same time we have been massively sidetracked. Going back to the deficit in fundamental education leads to a lot of hacks. So we are very schooled in listening to politicians use scripts or use teleprompts. We default to what we believe should be good communication because it sounds fluent. It sounds like they know what they're talking about. The media tells me they're a great orator, so therefore I'll use my shortcut thinking and believe they are, and I'll build a value system around that. So I think the hacks have really sidetracked a lot of our intuition on the kind of global public stage. But then when we go back to the canonical setting of all communication, which is we are chit-chatting with our friends, with our family, we're highly intuitive. And this is the rub, is that you're nodding at me now, David. You're keeping me in a conversational setting inside a feedback loop. So as long as you're being honest with your nods, and the feedback is you'll tell me when I'm going on too long or when I'm becoming less clear, that feedback immediately self-corrects me. That is the massive health factor, which is around conversation. And at that level, we're super sharp because we'll correct it as soon as the joke goes on too long or it's inappropriate or we've got it. Yeah. So what we're looking at here is this gap between where we're all socially, not all, but many of us are socially skilled in terms of conversational understanding of what is effective and useful. Then there's this massive gap between that relaxed setting and where we have to perform under pressure, which is
that's it.
Frankly, 90% of our professional lives. That's where we fall into a huge gap of not understanding the principles, where we naturally extend what's happening in that conversation.
So it's about being more skillful, being more intentional in settings where the pressure's on, and or you might feel you have to be a different person. That may be about your own insecurities, or it might be about the organizational culture you operate in. So you work with lots of executives all around the world. I mean, you're a global citizen, even though you're coming in from Cornwall, which is obviously the center of the world. What are some of the big gaps that you see, in terms of skill sets, around speech and intelligence?
The gaps are terribly common, and they can sometimes be hidden by an individual's experience or supposed seniority within an organization. For example, I'm a managing director, therefore I'm probably very content rich, I'm very experience rich. When we peel back those layers, we actually find a lot of commonality in terms of, go back to the raw fundamentals. If we are not conscious that humans are poor at thinking and speaking at the same time, and that a speech pattern needs a gap and a break very frequently, and that most of the time in the English language, for example, each word burst has fewer than 8 words in it. If we try and break those rules, because we have a lot of content up here, because we have a lot of experience, we compound a lot of the issues that a 16-year-old faces with much less content or much less experience. So we are doctors, but the ailment is very common. It's boringly common, and it's all about helping someone stabilize their speech pattern for it to become productive, for it to become efficient. That just gets harder the more life goes on, because there's more to have to deal with.
You probably take it as, I imagine, I'm now personalizing this, and I would say for me, my brain goes pretty quickly. Doesn't mean it's good brain work, but it's pretty quick in certain aspects. And if I don't either prepare what I want to say and or stay in the moment and consciously slow down, I can talk too quickly and occasionally stutter. Partly because I'm enthused and energetic. That's when I'm in the zone, I enjoy it. But I have to now, based on our conversations and the reading I'm doing, intentionally pause or slow down, whilst also trying to still be myself. Because we've all seen those people who are like overly manufactured, going back to the people giving the public speeches, where they've gone on a course, had a coach somewhere, and before they were reasonably natural, even though imperfect, and then suddenly they speak a lot slower with a lower tone or whatever the change is, and you think that's not authentic. So it's interesting. Preparation is key. Staying in the moment is key. Is there any other thing or tips or things you could share with the listeners that work with your clients and indeed work for yourself? Because you speak.
Let me root back to our kind of core values, and we declare these because in coming out with something like speech intelligence, it's quite a bold statement, really.
Yes.
But we're values driven, and we believe that those values are around maintaining agility in how you speak. That's that you're clear and confident at the surface of it, but that you never leave your authentic self behind.
Yes, I like that.
It is a more structured sense of me in conversation. And thirdly, that you do stay on point for that listener. So these combination of behaviors are about foremost being listener centric, but at the same time, not undervaluing what you've got to contribute. Within that, it is entirely possible for every individual with the faculty of speech to coordinate what they're thinking with what they are about to say. So for instance, if you're a very quick processor,
yes,
I'm a much slower processor, but if you are a very quick processor, it's likely that your speech pattern is not ready to contain the thoughts in a fluent way. It is actually, we call that oversupply into your speech pattern. There's too many thoughts, not enough capacity within your speech unit.
Sounds familiar.
So we kind of have to, in that sense, we have to kind of rein back and use slightly longer pauses and break into very simple concepts. And you should, at a level, feel more coordinated and more in control.
And actually, you might say less.
You will.
But with more, you will, and with more impact. But from, again, I'm personalizing it. There's probably a part of me that says, I've got lots of these thoughts and I want to share all of them.
Yeah.
Where it's all of them is not great. It's not good. They're not all good thoughts. But there is something about, as you say, being structured and slow down. And James, it's interesting. As an aside, my son is non-verbal, which means he can't talk. He has a brain injury. And so when I am speaking with him, I have to be much more intentional about what I say and how I say it. Not just because the fact he can't speak, but his brain capacity at the moment and cognitive capacity is less than it would be for other child. So it's interesting. In one setting, I am actually very intentional, short sentences, pauses, single words, but it's applying the similar principles to other settings where I think, hey, it's free reign. So it's actually there's a sense of discipline as well, right? Discipline in certain settings.
Absolutely. And that really, for all that we're kind of quantifying all of these behaviors, and this is really how we'd like to scale the agenda of speech intelligence, is that the listener-centric, desirable behaviors that are entirely possible for a speaker to attain, that it can be objectively measured, that we're not saying this is good or bad communication, but we are saying that at the point of departure of that speech or that communication with the hand, with the body, with the voice, it's coordinated, it's intact, it's in good shape to at least be appreciated by the listener. They then make up their subjective mind as to whether they accept it or they reject it, but that's fine. You are putting the listener in a very good position to make up their authentic mind about you. Now, this is fascinating to hear. I should suspect, in terms of your son, you're having to super adapt your behaviors to optimize the chance of him communicating in return to you. And that,
at least the first thing is understanding. That's the first thing. And then, yes, I hope at some point in his life he'll say one word. I'm going to get emotional talking about this, but the first thing is, frankly, I want to maximize his ability and chances of understanding what I say. So I have to, it's a different, candidly, it's still me, but it feels like a very different me.
Yes. And I think that every listener and every listening situation presents a challenge for a speaker. But the notion we're trying to get across is, can you hover with consciousness above that communication situation and manage it from both parties' perspectives? That's it,
isn't it? And frankly, I'm being lazy in other contexts. But let's move away from me, although I'm sure you'll draw us back. Some exemplars. Go on, let's name some names of people where when you hear them, James, you think, they could still do with my coaching and my support and speech intelligence, but they're pretty good at what they do. Go on, give us some names. Go on.
So I can't speak from a personal perspective that if we are putting an individual through the analytics, through speech intelligence analytics, and there are 4 levels. Levels 1 and level 2 are learning levels. Levels 3 and 4 are analytics levels or advanced learning levels. We use level 3 on the outside world. We do analyze politicians. We do analyze business leaders. We do produce, to a degree, rankings. This is for our perspective to help understand whether we have weighted the measurements appropriately, whether they provide value. Our level 3 is our most popular one for doing this. It looks at the ability to maintain spontaneous agility, whether you're in a debate, whether you're in a media interview, whether you're in a keynote.
Yes, yes.
It looks at whether you maintain authentic self at the same time. So your score is going to be quite high if you're very fluent, but if actually the system picks up you're just reading from a script, then your authenticity is going to take a massive dive, which will pull the overall score down.
Yes, yes.
And we look thirdly at idea impact. Are you able to combine or package your ideas from a linguistic perspective such that it's going to be provocative for a listener over time? Melinda Gates, Sheryl Sandberg, Jack Ma, John Major. You wanted some names?
Yes, they score well on all those. I'm now quickly going through them and thinking my own. And the reality is, I probably heard some of them, but I'm now going to consciously go and find them and listen to them if I can. So that's brilliant. I love that. So we're now working in more hybrid environments. Some of us have already for many years, but given the pandemic, given the experience we've been inverted commas forced into, many companies are now experimenting with different flavors and variations of hybrid environments. What, if any, impact will that have on how we communicate and speak with each other?
Our speech intelligence is under more challenge than ever before. It's complicated in a face-to-face setting with many others because they'll give you different types of feedback at different times. We have to know how to manage and control the way that we're communicating. We have been in a virtual world for a long time now. If feedback we're getting is technology driven, I sense energy from you at the moment, but it's not going to be the same as being with David in the same room.
True.
We're not getting natural feedback nearly as frequently and as richly as we would. We have to be more adaptive. We have to really hover above even more situations and understand what's going on. Are we still communicating effectively? Can we adapt around this new situation? So when we come out of this, if we are more conscious and at a skills level better at communicating, it's because we've really overcome the virtuality or the virtual natures. There's another challenge slid in our way like a screen. How are you going to deal with this if we weren't terribly equipped in the first place?
I guess that's one of the reasons why we have become tired of calls like this, partly because some people fill their days with them, which is about habit or perhaps insecurity about not being or being visible in their organization. But also when you're having a conversation like this, as you just said, we have to make more effort to, I guess, read the signals, communicate more clearly, and perhaps be even more direct about things to avoid any misinterpretation. And if you're doing that, you're sort of flexing your muscles all the time. And so it'd be a fascinating experiment to see when we are moving more back into the physical world, how, as you say, how we adapt, or whether we are still on, a virtual sort of setting, as it were.
Will we interrupt as we're interrupting each other now on Zoom, which is less and less frequently, because we technologically can't. We have to wait until we believe someone has finished their turn, or else there's going to be so much chopping and changing that the meeting fragments. When we get back into the real world, are we more patient with the other side? Do we let them have their turn? Who knows? We may just forget everything, all of the superficial rules we've had to impose because of technology constraints.
Fascinating. My experience of working with executives, entrepreneurs, professionals over a number of years has been the willingness to allow silence, pauses, has reduced in a virtual environment. And these are people who I've known. So it's not about the fact that there's an awkwardness, but it's perhaps because it's just a new setting. Whereas when you're in the moment, there's probably other things you can look at. Whereas if somebody starts looking away, I guess one of our brain habits will immediately assume they're bored or they're looking at something else or something else has gone on. Or whereas when you're in the room, it is a more physically closed environment, which brings me on to a topic related to that, which is if you think about impact as a whole of some of the people you work with senior leaders and executives. Speech is critical, and I buy the concept, I buy the practice, and I think what you're saying is utterly brilliant. What are the most important other complementors to speech that really distinguish leaders when you think of them in terms of their overall impact with an audience, whether that's an individual or a bigger audience?
Speech intelligence is about your capacity as a listener just as much as it is a speaker. One of the primary complementors is that you are listening intelligently. Despite the expertise, the content that you may bring into a conversation, what are you able to hold back in the moment? What are you able to better interpret from the way someone is speaking to you? What are they trying to tell you? What do they mean?
Yes.
Beneath the surface. Hovering above a situation is your capacity to really understand where that interlocutor is coming from, what they're trying to tell you, more complex in a group setting. Can we, as that leader, become ever more the intelligent listener so that the interlocutor really does give us what is valuable and what they truly mean to say, so that they're not holding back really what they want to say. So as that leader, you're helping maneuver colleague, employee, team, workforce into a position where they tell it you for real, where they're on a level with you.
Yes.
That's incredibly challenging because you have to go against every instinct to say what you know, to give advice, to be helpful. One of the biggest enemies of effective communication is enthusiasm. It's so easy to overwhelm a listener.
Tell me about it. I've got the feedback. I'm curious about how you create the conditions for the listener to actually want to listen in advance of you actually talking. And let me explain what I mean. I know and know of people who I think have high speech intelligence, but frankly, the way they present themselves in terms of everything from their hair to their dress to their posture undermines their speech, unless there's somebody who is an attentive listener. Yeah. Because we're all superficial people in some ways. What you see in front of you, first impressions matters. So I'm curious as to, do you buy that concept? Do you think there are hygiene factors that are important before you get to speech, or actually is speech if you like, counteract that once you've got into your flow?
Ultimately, the listener makes up whether you're providing value or not. If you can continue to provide value to a listener, which even potentially increases in value, I believe a lot of the more superficial elements drop away.
Right.
I saw some incredible research quite a while back now about two speakers who came on a stage. One was dressed in a suit, a conventional suit. The second was dressed in a chicken suit. After a while, the audience forgot that the individual wearing the chicken suit was dressed as a chicken. They listened. To me, it puts in the crosshairs. Again, it's what we try to identify with, is the relationship between, which is how you pass information, that it joins the dots in the listener's head.
Yes.
But you say it with the reasonable degree of belief that you have for what you're saying. You're agile and authentic at the same time, and that you can stay on point. I believe you can keep those three skills in the crosshairs for the listener. Is what may have surfaced as a first impression may also quickly drop away because it's no longer relevant to the value that's being provided. So I believe that authenticity is everything, and we should be vested in it. But at the same time, if it is authentic to the detriment of staying clear and confident in everything you're bringing to a conversation, the overall matrix is not going to work.
And that's a challenge to some people who are on platforms, leaders on a town hall, to use that phrase, or virtual setting, where candidly they may think that their presence, their authority, their role, their dress, whether it's a chicken suit or a traditional suit, is enough to hold the attention. The reality is it isn't and shouldn't be. But I want to get even more practical for a moment and look beyond chicken suits. There are a number of predictable moments in our business lives that are difficult and stressful. Giving the pitch, negotiating something, having the difficult employee conversation, where what you say really matters, partly because of the care you have for the person or the situation, and indeed making sure you don't say something that could come back and haunt you later. What are the practical tips you could give somebody in, preparing for a difficult situation like that?
The difficult situation will not leave behind your entire library of experience. You speak with it in your mind. It will not leave behind that there's going to be a lot of emotion in the room at the same time in a difficult situation, both on the listener's part and perhaps on yours. You may be preoccupied with everything else which is going on in your day. The expertise comes in where you're able to refine exactly what it is you could be saying into as little as possible, and said as your true self as much as possible, so that the listener is receiving high value from as little from you as possible. That's your ultimate skill of refining and mastering everything that you potentially could put across into laser-like focusing on the very few things which are going to move the dial. And that is an extraordinary capability, because you have to hold back and manage so much stuff which is potentially going on at the same time.
Yes.
It's much more at that stage about emotion and reading listener reactions, their emotions, so that you can navigate an appropriate course. And as you're going through all the different permutations of your life, you're on this stage or in that interview room, it will be very easy to recourse to scripts that other people have written for you, so that the content at a level is there, but listeners can pick up if it's not coming from true self.
Yes.
And I think that whereas we can't completely remove the role and sometimes even the value of scripts, because we just have to be too many places too many times, is that we can bring back a lot more of the capability to speak a spontaneous, authentic self in some of these situations where it is okay not to be word perfect, where it's okay to be a little vulnerable, to come across with actually what you're thinking right now, for that to fill a third of the teleprompter experience. I believe that's going to allow you to stay connected to really what your stakeholders are thinking and feeling about you at that moment. And this is really where I want speech intelligence to try and help make a transition within industry and within society, is that we do not have to leap to the ultimate safety of everything scripted, everything is memorized. It's okay to be the extended conversationalist.
This is very powerful. And that connection that you talked about, where you hold the connection to the listener in whatever situation, I think is critical. Because you know the end of the spectrum you don't want to be on. You don't want to be the overly scripted person that may be in control, word perfect, but actually the other person's thinking, well, I could have heard it from a robot. Similarly, the person who's has verbal diarrhea, not really in control, however charismatic they are, that doesn't work either. It's being that authentic self, going with the flow of the conversation and using, the fewer words as possible. I'm now self-editing as I'm going, saying that and feeling very self-conscious because I don't do it well, but I'm going to do it better.
I had a thought, if you're a good explainer of things, it's because you use as few words as possible to build and then connect as many pictures as possible in the listener's mind, so that they're able to own the picture and the sense and the system of what's being explained themselves. You're merely nudging them into that.
You see, that's a different relationship and role that I think many of us think we have. James, you are pursuing a transformational mission, which I think is fantastic. It is inspiring and refreshing to listen to you and learn from you as you are speaking right now. I am already trying to improve what I'm doing in the moment. I'll continue to use your tools, and obviously we'll continue to keep in touch. Where can people find more about speech intelligence? Where can they find out more about it?
We work primarily with businesses at the moment. We're not, if I may say, terribly out there in the public. We don't do too much marketing. We do have a website at speechintelligence.com. It will encourage you to speak to us because we prefer to speak.
Yes.
We run a YouTube channel. I most weeks will post a learn fast video, which is learn something new in under 60 seconds that is fundamental to how you communicate. I do from time to time post on LinkedIn as well. So please visit the website, visit YouTube, Speech Intelligence, and talk to us, because there's a lot we want to say, but there's even more that we want to impart.
Wonderful. I'll share all of those links. James, I'm very grateful for your time, your wisdom, your kindness, and the spirit, which has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you for your time today. And that was another edition of Lancefield on the Line.